3 years of my life. Gone. And now I'm left picking up the financial pieces. I've kept this to myself for too long, but it's eating me alive, so here it is. I met Kenny on a day that should have been completely forgettable. I was on an Amtrak heading to see my sister in Chicago when the train hit something. No full derailment, but it damaged the undercarriage enough to leave us stranded somewhere deep in Pennsylvania. They ended up busing everyone to this tiny town with barely more than a diner, a bar, and a convenience store. The diner filled up quickly, so I ended up at the bar next door, dragging my overnight bag with me and ordering a sad-looking sandwich. While I texted my sister to let her know I'd be late, this guy a few stools down made a joke about how maybe the universe was forcing us to enjoy small-town America. That was Kenny, tall, a little scruffy, and surprisingly charming. We started talking. Turns out we were both headed in the same direction. He said he was done with the corporate world and was chasing something that actually mattered. I told him I worked in logistics. Nothing flashy, but solid. We talked for hours, shared a couple drinks, and exchanged numbers. Honestly, I didn't expect anything to come of it. But the next day, he texted. Then we met for coffee when I got back. That job interview he mentioned didn't work out, but he had another one lined up, and then another. There was always something almost happening, always one step away from his breakthrough. I didn't mind. The job market was rough, and he had this energy that made you want to believe. 6 months in, his lease was ending. My place was bigger, closer to the city center, and to be real, I'd already been covering most of our outings because he was between jobs. So when he suggested moving in, it felt like the logical next step. That's when things started to shift. The first month, he paid his half of the rent on time. Month 2, he was a little late. By month 3, he had this whole explanation about a delayed payment from a freelance gig, but promised he'd catch up next time. I didn't push. I could cover the rent alone. It was tight, but doable. And to be fair, the apartment was always clean and dinner was usually ready when I got home. I told myself it was just temporary. But the stories kept coming. Missed payments, delayed projects, clients who ghosted him. Meanwhile, I started working weekends and taking on extra shifts. Kenny would rub my shoulders and tell me how incredible I was, how grateful he'd be once his career finally launched. I wanted to believe it. Then one day, over coffee, my friend Jay asked why I was skipping a concert we'd planned. I told her things were a bit tight financially. She didn't say much, just gave me a look and asked how long I planned on funding Kenny's life. I got defensive, said we were a team, but the question stuck. I started noticing things. How often he used my card without asking, how the grocery bill had doubled but the fridge looked half full, how he always seemed to have money for drinks or the latest game but never for rent. One time I casually brought up marriage. Nothing serious, just a comment after my cousin got engaged. He froze, like I'd suggested something outrageous. Said he wasn't ready, that we were in a good place and didn't need to complicate it. I let it go, but I shouldn't have. Weirdly, things picked up after that. Kenny was out more often, said he was meeting potential clients, networking, following leads. He seemed excited, like maybe things were finally turning around. Then came that Friday. My friend Em invited me to dinner with her and her boyfriend. Kenny had already said he had a work event, so I went alone. I got to the restaurant early, but Em was acting off. Kept checking her phone, giving me this uncomfortable look. Then her boyfriend arrived, talking about some tech event from the night before, where apparently he'd seen Kenny at the open bar with his fiancée. I just stared at them, confused. Everything got quiet. Em hesitated, then pulled out her phone. Said she wasn't sure whether to show me, but earlier that morning she'd seen something on Instagram that didn't sit right. She handed me her phone. It was a profile I'd never seen before. Some woman named Daria, blonde. And her most recent post? A picture from last night. There were string lights, champagne glasses, and her hand showing off a diamond ring. The caption read, "I said yes. Can't believe I get to marry my soulmate." I kept scrolling through her profile. There were posts going back over a month. Captions like "my man" and "date night with the love of my life." One of them was from the beach just 2 weekends ago, which was strange because Kenny had told me he was visiting his parents upstate that weekend. I excused myself from dinner, told M and R I'd call them later, and went straight home. I opened up our shared credit card account, and that's when everything really sank in. There were restaurant charges I didn't recognize, a hotel downtown booked 3 weeks earlier, and a $2,800 transaction from a jewelry store. My heart dropped. He'd used my money to buy her ring. I sat in silence by the window, scrolling through everything. I didn't even realize how dark it had gotten. Around 9 p.m., I heard his key in the lock. He walked in, kicked off his shoes like it was any normal day, and went straight to the fridge. Cracked open a beer, paid for by me. I asked where he'd been. Networking, he said. Things are finally turning around. Then I asked, very calmly, if he had gotten engaged lately. You should have seen his face. At first, total shock. Then, this strange little smirk, like he was impressed I'd figured it out. I asked if he proposed to the woman in those photos. He shrugged. And then he said something I'll never forget. Can we not do this right now? I don't owe you anything. I lost it. You lived in my home, spent my money, and gave someone else a ring? I said it loud enough the neighbors probably heard. And then he said the thing that still haunts me. He looked at me, rolled his eyes and said, "Come on. You really thought I'd give you a ring? You're the kind of girl men end up with when nothing else works out." I blacked out for a second, not literally but emotionally. I didn't even realize what I was doing until my fist hit his chest. He stumbled back, spilled beer all over himself, and before he could recover, I slapped him. I told him to pack his stuff and leave. He tried to argue, said I was overreacting. So I grabbed his backpack, started stuffing whatever I could find, chargers, shirts, socks, and tossed it at him. I told him if he wasn't out in 5 minutes, I'd tell his new fiancée everything. That finally got him moving. He grabbed a few things, muttering about coming back for the rest later. I told him to coordinate with the landlord because I wasn't letting him back in, ever. He slammed the door. I changed the locks the next day, bagged the rest of his stuff, and left it by the dumpster. Then I blocked his number, email, and every social account. But the damage wasn't done. Once I started checking my finances closely, I realized just how much he'd taken from me. Over $20,700 in just the last 2 months. Restaurant bills, mystery subscriptions, and the ring. And that was just the beginning. I called the bank, but most charges were too old to dispute. He'd been an authorized user, so technically, they were allowed. I'd been so trusting, so careless. That was 3 months ago. And everything that's happened since? Well, that's a whole new chapter. Update number 1. First off, thank you to everyone who reached out after my last post. I didn't expect that kind of response, and honestly, it means the world. A lot of you asked what happened after I kicked Kenny out. Buckle up! That night, I couldn't sleep. Even with the door locked and bolted, I kept glancing at it every few minutes like he might come back. Around 3 a.m., the messages started. Some were angry. "How dare you embarrass me like that?" Others were manipulative. "We need to talk about this like adults." And then the ones that were just sad. "I have nowhere to go." I didn't answer. Not one. The next morning, I called in sick. I needed time to figure out how bad things really were. I made some coffee, sat down with my notebook, my bank statements, and my cards. And what I found made me choke on my drink. It wasn't just $2,700. When I looked further back, I found small withdrawals, odd purchases, recurring subscriptions I never signed up for. He'd been draining me slowly for months. The total damage? Over $400. That's on top of rent, on top of food, on top of utilities. I called the credit card company again, this time with a detailed list. The rep was kind but honest. Most charges were too old, and Kenny had been authorized. The best they could do was block future use and remove him from the account. They said if I wanted to go further, I could file a police report, and I seriously thought about it. But the idea of dragging this out, of seeing him in court, explaining every detail, watching him twist things, I wasn't ready. Not yet. Technically, I'd given him access to the account, so it wasn't considered unauthorized, but that didn't make it feel any less violating. At some point, I just decided to cut my losses. I needed to shift my energy toward fixing what was left of my life. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. It cost $170, money I absolutely did not have, but the idea of Kenny still having a key was worse than another hit to my already strained card. While the locksmith worked, I gathered up everything Kenny had left behind. His clothes, his ridiculous protein powder that had taken over half the cabinet. I shoved it all into trash bags. I sent him a single text. "Your stuff will be by the dumpster for 24 hours. After that, it's going to donation." Of course, just as I was dragging out the last bag, he showed up. Perfect timing, like always. He looked rough. Same clothes as the day before, unshaven. I briefly wondered where he'd even slept. Then reminded myself it wasn't my problem anymore. He tried to talk. Said I didn't understand. Said Daria wasn't what I thought. That he'd been planning to break things off with her. I didn't stop walking. Then he grabbed my arm. I yanked away so fast I scraped my elbow on the brick wall. I told him if he touched me again, I'd call the police. That shut him up. But I could feel his eyes on me the whole way back inside. 20 minutes later, the locksmith handed me new keys. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe in my own home again. The week that followed was a blur. I was exhausted, jumping every time my phone buzzed, making dumb mistakes at work. My supervisor noticed. I barely held it together through Friday, scrambling to fix errors and meet overdue deadlines. That weekend, my friend Jay invited me out for drinks, told me I needed to feel human again, but I couldn't afford it. I told her I was too tired, which wasn't a total lie. Then came Monday. I got called into my manager's office. I thought it was about a report I'd messed up the week before. It wasn't. They were restructuring. My role was being cut. 2 weeks' notice. A severance so small it wouldn't even cover next month's rent. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I nodded, signed the papers, walked back to my desk like everything was fine, then locked myself in a bathroom stall and had a silent panic attack that lasted 20 minutes. That night, I called my mom. We're not close. She lives in Florida with her second husband. We talk maybe once a month. But I needed to hear something comforting. Something solid. She tried to be kind, but mostly she said things like, "You should have never let him move in without a ring first," and asked if I'd thought about moving back home. Sleep on her pull-out couch? Listen to her husband rant about politics over dinner? Not happening. So I spent the next 2 weeks applying for every job I could find, sent out 73 applications, got 6 replies, all second-round interviews that never went anywhere. My inbox filled up with rejection emails. When I cleared out my desk on my last day, it felt like closing a chapter I didn't even realize had started falling apart long ago. Week 1 of unemployment, I still had a routine. I'd get up, apply for jobs, make lunch from whatever was cheapest, go for a walk to avoid using heat, make dinner, watch something on YouTube, and try to sleep. Then repeat. By week 2, my bank balance was in the double digits. I canceled Netflix, started timing my showers, ate mostly ramen and eggs. I called the electric company to negotiate a payment plan. I called my landlord to ask for an extension. He gave me until the 15th. The 15th came and went. I sold my old watch on eBay. Sold clothes on Poshmark. Listed my TV on Facebook Marketplace, but the only offers were insulting. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Kenny. Said he had a new phone. Or maybe he was using someone else's. Said Daria had found out about me, ended things, and he wanted to talk. Said he was sorry. Wanted to explain. I blocked that number too. Not because I cared, but because it reminded me just how badly I'd failed at recognizing who he really was. I had let this person into my world, my home, my finances, and he saw me as nothing more than a placeholder, a convenience, a safety net. By the end of the month, I was out of options. The landlord started leaving voicemails. My electricity was shut off for 2 days before I scraped together just enough to get it turned back on. I ate plain rice for 3 days because that's all I had left. Eventually, I gave in and applied for temporary assistance. It was humbling, filling out paperwork that laid bare every financial detail of my life, sitting in a crowded office, waiting hours just to be told I didn't qualify for immediate help. They said I'd made too much at my last job. Instead, they gave me a list of food banks. So the next day, I went. I stood in line, ID in hand, and accepted a cardboard box filled with canned food and bread that was nearly expired. I smiled like it didn't hurt, even though it felt like my face might crack. Carried that box home on the bus, clutching it tight, feeling like every set of eyes was on me. No one cared, of course, but shame makes everything feel loud. That night, an email popped up. A local warehouse was hiring for seasonal help. The pay was less than half of what I'd been earning before, but it was something. I responded immediately, had a quick phone interview the next morning, and started that following Monday. The work? Brutal. 10 hours a day on my feet, lifting boxes, scanning inventory, running between cold storage and sweltering hot aisles. My hands blistered, my back throbbed constantly, and by the time I got home, I was too exhausted to even think about applying to better jobs. Still, it covered part of the rent. Not all of it, but enough that my landlord agreed to extend my deadline, as long as I paid the late fees. Then one night I got home to find a paper taped to my door. An eviction notice. Apparently, partial payments weren't enough anymore. I had 30 days to pay everything in full or leave. I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at that notice. No tears, just silence. It was too much to even process. Then, a knock on the door. It was my neighbor. We'd barely spoken before, but she'd seen the notice and heard me come in. She asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. Obviously a lie. Then, almost like she hadn't heard me, she asked if I was looking for a roommate. Her cousin Rosalie needed a place to stay temporarily. If we split rent 3 ways, it could work out for everyone. I said yes immediately. Rosalie moved in 2 days later. She was quiet, respectful, paid her share in cash, and never asked questions when I had nothing but rice for dinner. We weren't friends exactly, but we shared a space, and that was enough. With her help, I managed to pay just enough back rent to stop the eviction. I was still drowning in debt, still working a job that barely kept me afloat, still eating like a college kid in finals week. But I wasn't on the street. That counted for something. Then one morning, 3 months after I kicked Kenny out, I was rushing for the bus and accidentally collided with someone on the sidewalk. I mumbled an apology, not even looking up. Then I heard my name. It was Kenny. He stood there like he'd been waiting. Same tired eyes, this time wearing a fast food uniform, the kind with the faded polo shirt and a visor. I tried to walk around him. He stepped in my way, said he'd been trying to reach me, said he made a mistake, said he needed to explain. I noticed the phone in his hand. It was ancient, a far cry from the shiny new iPhones he used to brag about. I guess life had humbled him a little. I told him I was late for work and kept walking. He called after me, saying he'd come back, that he'd fix everything. I didn't look back, just ran for the bus and made it through the doors right as they were closing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I missed him, not because I wanted him back, but because I was terrified he'd figured out where I lived. I wedged a chair under the doorknob of my room, even though I knew it was overkill. I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name, scribbled across the front. It was his handwriting. I didn't open it. Just tore it into pieces and dropped the shreds into different trash cans on my way to the bus stop. But I knew he wasn't done. Second update. Thank you to everyone who's been sending kind comments. I read them during my bus rides, and honestly, they're one of the few good things right now. A lot of you asked what happened next, so here we go. After I threw out the letter, I hoped Kenny would finally get the message. He didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw him around. Across the street from my building, near the bus stop. Even once at the laundromat I started going to because our building's machines were too expensive. He never came close, just stood there watching. Sometimes he waved, sometimes he tried to make eye contact. I ignored him, walked faster, pretended I didn't see. Meanwhile, my warehouse job went from difficult to miserable. They started extending shifts without notice. I'd show up expecting to work 8 hours and get stuck for 12. My feet were constantly swollen. My lower back burned every time I moved. I lived on cheap ibuprofen and whatever frozen food was on sale. One night, I got home and could barely stand up straight. Rosalie noticed. She was making soup. Simple, but warm, and offered me a bowl. It was the first homemade meal I'd had in weeks that didn't involve boiling rice or stirring powdered noodles. We sat at the kitchen table, eating in silence at first. Then we talked. Turns out Rosalie had her own version of Kenny. Different name, same kind of hurt. And weirdly, that made me feel less alone. Rosalie and I had started sharing dinners when our schedules aligned. Whatever we could throw together from the pantry and the grocery store clearance bin. It wasn't much, but it helped. Having someone to sit with, even in silence, made the apartment feel a little less heavy. Then, one morning in late November, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My throat was raw, my head was pounding, and I could barely sit up. I called work, voice barely more than a whisper. My supervisor sighed and reminded me, temp workers don't get sick days. If I didn't show up, I might not have a job to come back to. I dragged myself to the bathroom and grabbed an ancient thermometer. 103.5 degrees. That couldn't be right. I tried again. 103.8 degrees. I should have gone to urgent care, but I had $27 in my checking account, and payday was still a few days off. So I took the last of my ibuprofen, bundled up in every warm layer I owned, and somehow made it to the bus. I barely remember that shift. I scanned boxes, drank water from the fountain, and hid in the bathroom when the dizziness got too bad. Somehow I made it through. I remember standing at the bus stop, shivering even though sweat soaked through my coat. Then, nothing. Next thing I knew, someone was shaking me, a teenage girl, eyes wide with fear, asking if I was okay. I'd collapsed at the stop. She helped me sit up and asked if she should call someone. I said no, that I was just tired. I wasn't, not even close. But somehow I got on the bus. Somehow made it up 3 flights of stairs. Crawled basically into the apartment. I didn't even take off my coat. I collapsed on the living room floor. That's where Rosalie found me. She told me later she thought I was dead. I was pale, barely breathing. She got me into bed, made me sip water, and spent the night putting cool washcloths on my forehead. By morning, the fever had broken. I felt like I'd been flattened by a truck. Rosalie had already called my job. She told them I had pneumonia and wouldn't be in for at least 3 days. I tried to argue, told her I'd probably lose the job, but she shut it down fast. No job is worth dying for, she said. And she was right. But being right doesn't pay rent. I spent the next 2 days in bed, drifting in and out of fever dreams and stress spirals. Every time I was awake, I worried about money. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was HR from the warehouse. I expected to be fired. Instead, they asked how I was doing. Then they mentioned a short-term disability policy. Apparently, Rosalie hadn't just called in for me. She'd gone down to the warehouse in person, demanded to speak with someone, and raised enough of a scene that they actually dug through their own handbook. Turns out, even temp workers qualified for a few paid sick days. I got 5. Not enough to fully recover, but enough to avoid collapsing at a bus stop again. That evening, when Rosalie got home, I broke down crying. It was the first time in years that someone had fought for me. When I returned to work, things had shifted. My supervisor still looked at me like I might fall over at any second, but my coworkers, people who'd barely spoken to me before, were checking in, offering help with the heavier loads, reminding me to take breaks. Word had gotten around. The girl whose roommate went to war with HR. Meanwhile, the Kenny situation took a new twist. I stopped seeing him around, but the messages started pouring in. Long, rambling texts from different numbers. Maybe new phones, maybe borrowed ones. Paragraphs about how much he missed me, how Daria had ruined his life, how he just wanted to talk. I blocked every number, but it was exhausting. Jay suggested I change mine completely, but that came with a fee I couldn't afford. So I just kept blocking and pretending it didn't bother me. December hit like a wrecking ball. The warehouse was busier than ever with holiday orders, which meant more hours, but also more strain. My back was in constant pain. I started maxing out on ibuprofen just to make it through the day. My teeth throbbed non-stop. One molar had been aching for months, but dental care? That was a fantasy. The kind of thing people with insurance and savings accounts got to think about. Then one morning, freezing and waiting for the bus, I struck up a conversation with a woman standing beside me. Just small talk, late buses, cold weather. I barely had the energy to respond. But then she mentioned she worked at a medical office a few blocks away. I nodded, polite but detached, until she said something about their warehouse needing reorganizing. Something in me woke up. I must have looked desperate because I immediately asked if they were hiring. She blinked, surprised, but didn't say no. She gave me the name of their office manager and said I could drop by with a resume. I thanked her, not expecting much. Let's be honest, random bus stop conversations rarely lead anywhere. But at that point, I was willing to try anything. That evening, I updated my resume, if you could call it that, and printed a copy at the library. The next day, during my lunch break, I took a detour and walked into the medical office, asking for the manager by name. I expected to be told to apply online or to leave my resume at the front desk. Instead, I was shown into a small office where a woman sat eating a sandwich at her cluttered desk. She looked up, glanced at my resume, asked a few quick questions about my logistics background, and then, without missing a beat, asked when I could start organizing their supply area. It wasn't full-time, just 20 hours a week to begin with. But it paid $3 more per hour than the warehouse job. The schedule was flexible, and it actually involved using my brain, not just my body. I said yes right then and there. For the next few weeks, I worked both jobs, mornings at the medical office, evenings at the warehouse. It was physically brutal, but for the first time in months, I could pay my bills on time. Rosalie started cooking for both of us when she realized how run down I'd gotten. I'd come home, eat whatever she made, and collapse into bed without a word. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. By mid-January, I had saved just enough to leave the warehouse. On my last day, I handed in my badge and felt nothing but relief. My supervisor looked surprised, like they expected I'd just keep pushing through the misery forever. One coworker gave me an awkward side hug and said she was glad I got out. The job at the medical office wasn't fancy, but it was real work. As I proved myself, the manager kept giving me more hours. By February, I was up to 35 hours a week and had even been given a tiny desk in the back, complete with a beat-up desktop computer where I tracked supply orders. With steady paychecks, I finally started chipping away at the mess Kenny left behind. $20 here, 50 there. It wasn't much, but watching my debt shrink little by little gave me back something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Rosalie and I fell into a rhythm. We weren't exactly close, but there was a quiet respect between us. She started seeing someone, this quiet, polite guy, and sometimes he'd join us for dinner. It was the first time in ages the apartment didn't feel like a minefield of memories. Things were slowly, finally, getting better. My back still ached. My tooth still reminded me it needed a dentist. But I was standing, moving, breathing, one day at a time. Then came Valentine's Day. I'd done my best to ignore the store displays and lovey-dovey commercials. Rosalie and her boyfriend had dinner plans, so I had the apartment to myself. I was midway through eating frozen pizza on the couch when someone knocked at the door. Not a light knock, a heavy, urgent pounding. I froze, a slice of pizza still in my hand. It had to be Kenny. Who else would be that dramatic? I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Yep, it was him. He stood there holding a grocery store bouquet and a small box. I backed away from the door, hoping he'd think I wasn't home. But he knocked again, then called my name. Said he could see the light under the door. Said he just wanted to talk, to make things right. I didn't move. Eventually I heard him sigh. Something hit the floor, then footsteps retreating. After a few minutes I cracked the door open. On the ground was a wilted bouquet of roses, a small velvet box, and a card. I should have left them there. Should have kicked them all into the hallway. But I didn't. Curiosity won. Inside the box was a thin silver band with a tiny stone. Maybe a diamond, probably not. The card read, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to start making it right. This is the ring I should have given you. I've changed. Please call me." I stared at it. This was supposed to mean something? After everything? A budget ring and a recycled apology? I didn't feel rage, or sadness, or even pity. Just emptiness. This man had shattered my life and thought a ring from the discount jewelry counter would fix it. I dropped the card and the ring in the trash can next to the elevator, left the flowers on the floor for someone else to take. Then I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and finished my now cold pizza. The next morning, I woke up to another text from an unknown number. Kenny. Again. He asked if I'd gotten his gift. This time, I didn't block him immediately. I just typed 2 words. Move on. Then I blocked that number too. February rolled into March. Work at the medical office picked up. I was getting more hours, more responsibility. I even managed to completely pay off one of my smaller credit cards. One Sunday afternoon, Rosalie and I repainted the living room. We covered the old dingy beige walls with a soft gray that somehow made the entire place feel lighter, like we'd finally exhaled. My mom called around that time. Said I sounded more like myself. She even offered to help with my dental work if I came down to visit for a weekend. I hesitated. My stepdad and I have never exactly gotten along, but the thought of finally fixing my tooth was tempting. And Kenny? He finally seemed to get the message. The texts stopped. No more appearances. I checked Daria's social media once or twice. She'd moved on. New guy. New life. Kenny's account? Quiet. For months. I was rebuilding. Slowly, painfully, but for real. Not trying to return to who I was before. I don't think I'll ever be her again. But something stronger. Wiser. Still cautious maybe, but grounded. Final update. Life went on. I'm now full-time at the medical office with actual benefits. I got that dental work done during my visit to my mom's. Rosalie and I renewed the lease, even though she was spending most nights at her boyfriend's place. My credit score started climbing. I even managed to put a little money away for emergencies. I went on a couple of dates, nothing serious. Trust doesn't bounce back overnight, but I was open to the idea of someday maybe. Then a month ago, Jay texted me. She'd run into Kenny at a coffee shop, said he looked good. Asked about me, but in a respectful way. Said he was moving to Pittsburgh for a fresh start. I thanked her for the update and didn't think much of it. Kenny moving away seemed like the best possible ending. which is why I was completely blindsided when I opened my door last week. And there he was, standing on the doormat holding a small gift bag. My first instinct was to slam the door, but he looked different. Clean-shaven, healthier, dressed like someone with somewhere to be. He immediately raised his hands, like he could feel the panic coming off me. Said he wasn't staying. He was leaving town, just wanted to drop something off. I took the bag reluctantly. Inside was a small box and an envelope. The envelope held $1,500 in cash. The box? That ring, the one from Daria's Instagram, the one he'd bought with my money. He explained that when Daria left, she'd thrown it at him. He kept it, thinking he might pawn it someday, but never did. Now, he was giving it to me, not as a gesture, but as property. Said I'd paid for it, so it was mine to do with what I wanted. Keep it, sell it, toss it in a river. He told me he had a job lined up in Pittsburgh, that he planned to send more payments until everything he owed me was returned. That he was truly sorry, not just for what he did, but for what he said that night. That I deserved far better. That he hoped I'd found it, or would soon, and then he left. Just a wave, no drama, no grand exit. I took the ring to a jeweler the next day. It wasn't worth nearly as much as he'd paid. Smaller stone, generic setting, but I got just under $1,000. It went straight into my savings, so that's it. That's the end of the Kenny chapter. I'm doing okay now. The medical office gave me a small raise last month. Rosalie moved in with her boyfriend, and I found a new roommate, a quiet grad student who pays rent on time and doesn't steal leftovers. My back still complains on rainy days, a souvenir from those warehouse shifts. My credit's still healing. And yeah, sometimes I still double-check the locks at night, but I'm okay. I'm building something slow, steady, and mine. As for Kenny, I don't know. Maybe he really is changing. Maybe he'll make good on those payments. But I've learned not to build my life on anyone else's promises. To everyone who followed this story, who sent kindness when I had none left for myself, thank you. Your comments were like flashlights in the dark. I probably won't post again. This story's over now, but I'm so grateful for the space to tell it, and for the strangers who reminded me I wasn't as alone as I felt. Here's to new chapters, and better beginnings.